Hello and welcome to the Xenothesis podcast. In this episode, we're covering chapters 1 and 2 from book 2 of Octavia Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy, entitled Adulthood Rites. This is part 1, Low. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host,
Michael Glinka. Hi, everyone.
So, new book.
I know, it's the moment, because the last book's predictions for the new book were I was trying to predict something, but as always, you can't predict all those little details, but I'm really excited to read it. I'm already like, oh my god, I want to read more. It's so good.
So I suppose the interesting twist, I suppose, is initially here we have a shift of perspective, right? We're no longer kind of in Lilith's head so much as in our new character.
Yes, absolutely. The new perspective, and it's such a different perspective as well. Although, how do you describe? I mean, we'll have to go through the chapters when we go, and it'll be visible how different it is. But it's just so interesting because it allows us to look through the both human and sort of Oankali perspective in a way. Which is something which was something so bizarre, like difficult to imagine from the book 1, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think in the first book of this, we get a really good sense of the alienness of the cognition of the Oankali, because we're seeing it from Lilith's very human perspective. But now we have a hybrid perspective, one that is both human and Oankali. So I suppose we should probably do a little bit more on your prediction and then get into the summary so that people have an idea of what we're talking about.
Yes, exactly. So in the last prediction I did on the last episode on Xenogenesis, to the last chapter of the book 1, I said that in the first chapter we will be introduced to the point of Lilith's where she's nice and pregnant, and by nice I mean in the late stages of pregnancy, as I was pointed out. That may sound a bit weird when I say that in that format. Still, while being still on the ship, about to give birth, or just being pregnant and also about to give birth, and that's when we will be introduced to Lilith's new task: awaken more people and get ready to go to Earth, which is not really in those chapters at all. In the first 2 chapters that we're going to cover today, completely, there's nothing about Lilith's new task or anything. We were not given any more information, and in fact, I think there's no information whether we are on the ship or not.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Do we know what? Because I know where we are, but I can't remember whether or not you do yet.
No.
I don't think we have. Yeah.
No, we are not.
Okay, so we don't actually know.
Yeah, we're only given the information. There's some mention about humans and everything. If they will, accept Lilith's son or not. But nothing else. That's it. We only have the perspective of the child.
Speaking about that perspective, yeah.
Should we start? Because it's just so tempting to just start talking about.
Yeah, we need enough context that people can follow.
Yes. So, chapter 1 throws us a perspective of a fetus, and then a child basically developing from that fetus inside of the womb. And from what we can guess, have a proper educated guess, it's Lilith's womb. We're given from the perspective of the child that first there were sounds and tastes, then came touch, comforting. It was pleasing, and when it disappeared and sometimes reappeared, the baby learned anticipation. That it was nice. It wanted that feel of the touch. He, as we are told, could sense changes within its own body, the baby's body, and the dual pain it was causing. The development of the child's body as it undergoes normal fetus development. Yet he was not afraid, because it was meant to happen. Then the time came, and he was propelled along in regular pulses until he saw light. It grew brighter and more painful, reached its maximum as the compression ended. No part of his body was free of the sharp, raw brilliance. Later he would recall it as heat, as burning. Eventually the light muted, the pain subsided. A familiar touch was present, although not the same as before. something touched his face, he turned mouth often open to take it and get food. He could hear voices and even distinguish individual sounds, although understood none of them. And this is where Lilith comes back finally in the book. He's beautiful, one voice said. He looks completely human. Some of his features are only cosmetic, Lilith. Even now his senses are more dispersed over his body than yours are. He is less human than your daughter's. The conversation continued then, with Lilith mentioning that the other persons, we can, I think, assume it's Nikanj.
Assume it's Nikanj, yeah.
Yeah. The people, in this case the Oankali, worry about the human-born males, but the problem, whatever it was, has been solved. The baby is healthy and his senses are normal.
Yeah, so that's a kind of surprising introduction to it, right? We get this perspective shift, and we see everything from this new mind.
Yes,
that's and also it's an experience we don't normally get from other humans, right? Because we don't remember this.
No, nobody remembered this. That's the thing. Like it's very surprising because it shows as if the fetus was already aware of that it exists, right? The consciousness is there.
Although it's hinted at that there's some kind of retrospect in Akin. I think that's the name. We have not mentioned it yet. Akin's like recollection of this experience is kind of, it's made sense of in retrospect to some degree.
Yes,
there's the immediate experience, but he's sort of interpreting it after the fact. So I think it kind of it gels with this kind of notion that they have of this like genetic memory type stuff, where they kind of have almost like a direct readout of their perceptions kind of stored somewhere, and then they can kind of go back and make sense of them in the same way that they can go back and make sense of the experience of past individuals with the genetic memory thing from the Oankali. So I think it fits in that regard. And
I also think that the book is a bit misleading in the fact that the time that passes, because he says, Akin, the baby, speaks of body changes of the body and the associated dual pain with it, right? It means that the passage that over the, like, we are talking about months of this happening, right? Because we assume that this is normal fetus development, that so Lilith has been pregnant for 9 months. Up until he was born. So
assuming the gestation's the same, yeah.
Yes, assuming the gestation is the same, we have like, let's say 9 months of so within those 9 months, all those things that like all those, the touch, the taste, that all those different senses that Akin start to perceive have been happening over a prolonged time. But the book sort of crunches it in a way, as you said, it feels like a retrospective because it's almost immediate, right?
And I think also the subjective experience of time is somewhat variable, right? We can perceive more or less time to have passed based on sort of oftentimes how much stuff is changing in that period.
Yes, absolutely.
Some reference points.
Memories work like that. Like if things are much faster in memories. But it's surprising because I had a look into what the real sort of development of a child's consciousness is, right? That sort of thing. And I found several articles about the fact that the fetus and the baby is actually mostly asleep during development. It's the consciousness is not developed there yet.
Well, I think this comes down to a bit of a distinction of how we end up defining consciousness.
Well, yes, but before we go into that topic, okay, what I mean is the association, the physical brain activity that was measured when images of faces, taste, and stuff like that were shown to newborn babies, and then and later stage of the older babies, several months old, it was shown that the brain activity was not the same up until there was almost no brain activity in a way that a baby in later stages showed, and we're talking about 2 to 5 months. That's when sort of that recognition of things, the self-awareness appeared after 2 to 5 months. So
yeah, the sort of brain activity that's associated with brain awareness, I think.
Yes.
Or self-awareness rather. But yeah, it's the distinction, I suppose, between self-awareness and awareness in other senses, right? Because it's
yeah.
like the ability to kind of have ability to experience something as a sensation in the moment is not necessarily the same thing as having self-representation.
Yes.
And even actually, so the article that you mentioned there about the kind of activity in, I think it was a prefrontal cortex activity at the kind of 2 to 5 month point. There are patients who have had almost complete resections of their prefrontal cortex who still have a reasonable sense of self. So there is there's a bit of controversy as to kind of what exactly constitutes self-awareness and whether or not that can be correctly mapped to particular brain regions. So it's kind of it's an ongoing...
no, of course. Yeah, I mean, I understand that it's such a... I mean, any neuroscience subject, whatever you mention something, is not going to be like... We are talking about 30% accuracy, I would say. This is me just throwing a number out there. But the fact is that it is...
I mean, specifically when it comes to questions of how subjectivity relates to particular brain activity, it's a very difficult thing to do, especially when you don't have self-report.
Yeah, that's the thing. We
yeah.
can't have a baby report what it's seeing and what it's experiencing, and that's the problem. But when it comes to at least, let's say, an awareness of self, sort of recollection and self-awareness, that's the time when babies are starting to realize their own existence in a way. Obviously, before that, obviously they perceive everything, touch, taste and stuff like that.
So there's a distinction between like the ability to experience stuff and the ability to model yourself as experiencing that stuff.
Yeah. So in case of Akin, it's amazing because we know that Oankali and Lilith have eidetic memory, so they remember everything. So all those experiences that Akin had in the womb, and as it was born and it's aware of those things, it just shows that its development is much, much faster compared to a normal human baby, I would say.
I think yes. Probably, yeah. Although the kind of the retrospective component, I think perhaps makes that a little bit more plausible because it's a little unclear if he has like, I mean, you get his first person perspective, but you don't necessarily get a sense that he's like reflecting on it in the moment, right? You have the record of the experience, and then the awareness kind of comes later. So that's what I was kind of alluding to with this idea of this like genetic memory that they have as being almost like a kind of a direct record of like the sensory inputs, and then they can kind of go back with a more conscious mind and interpret them as though they were experiencing them more at the time, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I guess it's because of it's later on. Later in the next chapter, it sort of talks about this, but at this point, it's sort of like feels like, and the way it's presented, it feels like Akin was almost aware of things that were happening at the time, right? It's just the way that the book was presenting it.
Yeah, and I suppose it's a difficult thing to draw a distinction between. I mean, especially even in human memory, right? Like when we think about recalling an experience, we're not very reliably recalling it, and we're kind of reconstructing some compressed version of it by rerunning some stuff to produce an output that resembles whatever it was that was going on at the time, right? We're kind of reconstructing the experience in retrospect, and I think we have kind of a similar thing here. So it's a bit difficult to distinguish from the perspective of someone at a later time point what is something that you had awareness of at the time and what is something that you have like a sensory recollection of. It's not really a distinction that comes up much in the human context, except when maybe you compare like what your memory of an experience was to what like a video or audio recording of the experience was. Yeah. And then you kind of, you realize where the points of divergence were.
I mean, that's the thing, like we are very prone to modify our memories if somebody else, like, for example, if somebody else involved in the memory says, oh, like, actually, it was more of like this and this, and you're like, oh, actually, that might be the case. And the realization that one, either your memory is not perfect of the events, or the other person's memory is also imperfect, and basically it has collated into this sort of bastardization of the actual event, when in fact it's something else that happened.
And you basically can't touch a memory without like corrupting and overwriting it.
Yeah.
Like whenever you recall something, whatever you kind of recalled, whatever you reconstructed during the recall process gets written down to wherever it was that the memory was before. So you end up with kind of a like the Whispers game where you pass on the message, right? It gets changed a little bit every time. Yeah.
But the thing is that I think also the reason why the book put it in this way is that to show how that Akin is already different than a normal human baby. Right?
Oh, yeah.
This is to present that Akin is not the same as normal human baby as usually, presented like, oh, we remember a flash maybe of being born. Usually people know and remember. The first memory usually is like when you're like 2 years old or something, right? That's probably the furthest memories that people can go back in time, right?
Yeah, I mean, if that's even pretty early, probably talking 3, 4.
Yeah,
that's a bit more average.
Yeah, so
my first memory is around. Actually, no, well, kind of by relay, mine's around about 2 years, I reckon. That's
because you're a genius.
I remember like the landing on. I remember like the landing in the hall of our house in Scotland.
Oh, really? Okay.
I was only about 2 when we left there, so that's like it's like a static image of like the carpet basically, but that's about it.
I mean, so that's the thing.
And after that, it's much more.
Yeah, that's the thing. This is your furthest memory, but in here we have a full recollection of a child experiencing being born. So that's a complete different aspect of like it already shows that Akin is more than just human, which is incredible. Like, I mean, this is so it's really interesting because it shows also gives a glimpse of what it is to be an Oankali at the same time. Yeah.
And what the subjective experience of having that kind of memory is like.
Yeah. So going back to the chapter, the conversation continued from that Lilith and Toad were talking about like the baby is more, even though he looks completely human, he's more than that. And Lilith, the conversation continues with Lilith mentioning that the other people, assuming the Oankali, worry about the human-born males, but the problem is whatever it was has been solved. The baby is healthy and his senses are normal. And Lilith then thanks for the first time to Nikanj that he made the baby look human so that she can love him. But Nikanj tells her that she'll continue loving her child no matter what because he is perfect and he needs all the love he gets for whatever he will face in future. So that's where the chapter ends, and it's an incredible because it was such a quick punch in the face, right? You read it and you're like, wow, okay, so this is after analysis of the previous book. This shows like this is so much different. The first time we have a different perspective, and the perspective is so much more unique. It was honestly, I want to read the rest of the book immediately.
Well, it's a good start, I suppose.
Yes.
I think it's a short initial chapter. I think it's only about 650 words, but good hook.
It's a good hook, yes, and it makes you think about like the other stuff and how would other development of the child is how human babies develop and when's the first consciousness and what's the furthest memory you have and stuff like that. It's just like. And then you have this, like a human Oankali baby that can remember it's being born. Even further, it can remember it's like changes in the body. It's just like, wow.
And we have some little hints about other stuff, like the suggestion that the other kind of human male Oankali hybrids had some kind of issues.
Yes,
it's kind of hinted at.
Yes, there was some potential problems that they had, and I think the chapter 2 actually goes into more detail on that, although not so much. But maybe I should go to chapter 2 prediction first before that.
And so there's one other thing though about the point about Lilith loving her child. It's kind of implied that like the other children were less human in some sense, or other children have been less human. And so I don't know if this is. I think we kind of get the suggestion this is not her first child.
That's the thing, right? So she mentions her daughters, right? Before that, before Lilith on the Earth, she had a son, didn't she? Before the war.
Yes.
So yes, that suggests that she has daughters, huh? Because I was reading this and I was thinking, daughters. I remember that Lilith had a child. She had she had babies before, children, but I couldn't remember whether it was a son or a daughter, or whether there was more.
Yeah, she only had one son.
Yeah, she had one son, so that means that she has daughters, or the daughters could imply the children of Ahja and Dichan.
Yeah. I suppose the other daughters of the family unit, potentially. Yeah.
But yeah,
just the kind of the suggestion that like made human so that she could love him kind of gave me a sense of the possibility of tension in the relationship between Lilith and other offspring of the family unit.
Or it could, yes. I mean,
just trying to sort of pick up on things that are like seeds for future dramatic tension of some kind.
No, you're absolutely correct on this, because I was thinking it is the mention of later in the next chapter about the human children as well. But yeah, potentially there might be other children involved in this whole situation, that there might not be exactly as Lilith imagined. Huh. Interesting. I didn't think, like, I thought about this, but I was focusing more on Akin in the first place than thinking about that there could be other. That puts perspective a bit different, because that means much more time has passed than I thought originally. I need to go back to.
Okay.
I need to check the other chapter. That's because I remember. But wait, hold on a second, because in the previous book, in the last chapter, when Nikan drops the bomb on Lilith, saying she's pregnant, and I think Nikan suggests that it's a boy.
I don't remember specifically, but I don't recall it being gendered specifically. I think it was just a child, but I may be wrong about that. I'd have to go and check.
I'm gonna check now. I don't remember, and this is really gonna bug me now. No, you're right. You're now ready to have Joseph's child, Joseph's daughter. I mixed a girl to be companion for you. There we go.
Okay, yeah. I'd missed that because it's an explicit. Oh yeah, of course, because girl, yeah. I didn't put those two together initially because we get Akin's sex as male, and previously we had daughter, and we get the allusion to Lilith's other daughters. So yeah,
there we go.
It seems like Lilith has had other children.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
So that proves that Lilith's had a daughter, and it seems that there might be something that puts a boundary between her and Lilith, the children and the daughters and the Lilith, and it seems that they might not look as human as Lilith probably originally wanted to. Huh, interesting.
So the fabric of the hints here is richer than I thought.
Yes, it's much richer than you expect. You thought, and I actually initially thought as well. Wow. Okay, this is another bomb that I didn't expect to drop so early. Interesting. I'm looking forward to it. Oh my god, I want to read. But let's go back.
Let's get into chapter 2.
Yeah,
then.
yes. So my chapter 2 prediction was that we learn more about the newborn child, the perspective of the human-Oankali baby, and the subtle differences between him and what a normal human child would be. And the chapter starts with the name. We know I am Akin, right? The name that was given, that we were taught, but this is where we actually properly learn officially. He was given comfort and food, and through the body-to-body touch, he gained more understanding of the world around him. He could feel that some who touched him, that some of those who touched him, he could find fragments of himself in them. As the book says, he was himself, and he was those others, suggesting the Oankali, that he could sense the Oankali's genetics, that part of him in them.
Yeah, it's interesting because the sense of being able to detect fragments of himself in the others. That's a really interesting way of putting it. But yeah, it feels it feels very much like he's kind of getting an initial handle on his kind of like genetic sense.
Yes. And then, the chapter goes on with he started attaching voices to people within days of his birth. And he had learned his own name. Surprisingly, he could say it out loud very quickly. And so the others started to teach him their names. Nikanj Oan, Lilith Mother, Ajas T, and Dichan Ishlin. And the one who never came, but Nikanj taught him the touch, taste, and smell of his father, Joseph. So interesting. Ajas T and Dichan Ishlin. So should that suggest that like auntie, uncle? Or it's like second mother, second father? Yeah,
I suppose they may have specific like non-translatable terms directly because of the way that the Oankali family structure works with. But yeah, I suppose something to that effect. Auntie uncle is probably like the closest match we'd have.
Potentially, but I just thought it was interesting that they gave us the more and Oan, of course, the Uloi. But the name of the... but I think the Oan was used before in the previous book, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I think we've seen that one used before. Yeah.
So...
And it is interesting that he can speak aloud this early, because babies normally, the kind of... The soft palate's not like, quite formed right for really doing much enunciation.
Yes.
So it's...
But that's the thing. Later in the book, it says that he already had teeth when he was born. So, meaning the development was much faster compared to normal human baby. But anyway, we'll get to it. He then called out at some point to his father, but Nikanj told him that he's dead, gone away, not coming back. But he was part of Akin. And 2 months passed, and Akin was already able to put simple sentences together. I mean, like, come on, this is like incredible. We are talking about a few months old
very fast
child to be able to put simple sentences. He was learning fast and wanted to know more.
Just before we do that, I just wanted to reflect briefly on the fact that Nikanj is able to reproduce the taste and smell of Joseph.
Yes.
Which is an interesting capability.
It's interesting because one, he could preserve Joseph's sperm for some time in his own body, and now he can actually reproduce the taste, smell, and touch of what Joseph was like.
I assume they have some kind of the thing where they have a print of someone. Effectively, I assume they can, take some of the things that characterize a person's unique smell.
Yes,
some of the.
I think so as well. It's the genetic imprint, I would say, that Nikanj is holding to show what Akin, who Joseph was. And that's the thing. Akin was learning really fast and wanted to know more. And Lilith commented on the fact on how quickly he was learning, and as he was fed, as told by Nikanj, he would use his tongue, his least human visible organ, to study Lilith. Right? This was interesting. What really caught me, that his tongue was his least human visible organ. It says that he would not only taste the breast milk, but also her flesh. And initially it was just the macro surface of the nipple, of the skin. But with time it was more in-depth details, the cells of her skin, both living and dead. And that's what taught him what dead was, that the hair skin, the outer dead skin of the epidermis that contrasted with the living flesh underneath. And his tongue was like the sensory tentacles of Ahjas or Dichan. And when he tried to probe further by sending a filament of it into the nipple, he felt pain. Not his, but Lilith's. It made him scream and weep, and he refused to be comforted until Nikanj showed him how to probe without causing the pain. Lilith described the feeling as being stabbed with a hot, blunt needle, and Nikanj told her he won't do it again, and Akin never did, because he would share the pain he caused. And this is what's unusual. They say that he would not know for months how unusual it was for an infant to recognize the pain of another person and recognize himself as the cause of the pain. It is incredible because this is the second step, I would say, that shows that how different Akin was to humans, that his tongue could actually send the probe, whatever it was, looked like. Sort of, it makes me feel uncomfortable, but thinking about it, it's like those like animals that release those like tendrils of things. Ugh.
Yeah, he's got. I think his tongue's kind of like one of those. Yeah, like they say, one of the sensory tentacles. So it's kind of probably a little bit longer than normal, maybe forked. Like a
Wow,
little snake-like thing.
oh my god. Okay. I just imagine a normal child, but then like his tongue can open, like, I don't know, alien, just like another tongue comes out of it. It's just something. Ugh, goosebumps. But it was interesting because it says that it was his least human visible organ, and which is very surprising because you would think that it would be his hands or something that would be more of the sensory organ like. Right, because that's where the Oankali, how did they have those tentacles? That's but then again,
I mean, I suppose they have it concentrated in the sensory arms or the sensory tentacles, but then there's their skin is kind of covered in those like other tentacles that they also sense stuff with.
Yes.
Right? So perhaps it's more like his skin is, and it does seem as though he has quite kind of acute sensory awareness of stuff through his skin, like the sensation of light and so on. He seems to be able to perceive light almost through his skin. And it's strange.
It is, and
imagine being able to. That would be such a weird thing to be able to perceive, right? Like light levels on your skin. That would be a really weird sensory input.
Yeah, I mean, doesn't it suggest like I mean, there are some people who have this sort of what's the word? The sensation that they can sense, like I mean, in a way you can sort of imagine it like being heat, right? Like when you go to the sun and it's nice and warm, and but it must be in a bit more different level, right? More detailed, specific the level, right, of sensory.
Presumably.
But there is this, what's the word for the sensation where you can see sounds and stuff like that.
Oh, synesthesia.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. That must be similar to what he's experiencing, but in a more finer detail and natural detail for him, at least. But that's the thing. Like later on, as the time passed, when as he probed Lilith, he would perceive into like less and less cells and few cells, cluster of cells, than single cells. Then he would look inside of the cells, the nucleus, then the chromosomes, then the DNA that unwind in those chromosomes, and the nucleotides. So he could already sense the genetics of another being, like the Oankali. But there was something beyond the nucleotides he could not perceive, a world of smaller particles that he could not cross into. And I think this is where the boundary was for him. Like he could not perceive separate atoms, maybe, or the basic building blocks of what atom.
Yeah, it seems like his sensory resolution kind of stops at the level of like individual nucleotides, which would kind of make sense from the perspective of like whatever sensory apparatus he has to perceive stuff is presumably going to be limited to looking at like the individual monomers of polymers in biology, or detecting the chemical gradients and stuff, but you wouldn't really be able to get anything more finely resolved than that without going to some non-real physics. yeah
It's pretty interesting. So I thought that this sort of boundary that he's hit at that point is like, 'cause there's something that he doesn't understand.
Yeah, it's kind of at the limit of resolution of his sensory abilities.
It's interesting because he can sense the different nucleotides, right? So it has to be sort of like a probing of the biochemical probing, like a polymerase can detect what sequence there is or stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are molecules that can sense single atoms, like single hydrogen on a molecule, right? A single proton. And so it feels to me that it's an interesting limit.
I suppose it would be. Yeah, I mean, for me, it made a reasonable amount of sense because presumably he would have to have evolved some mechanism that does this perceptual work, right? There's something like a polymerase or a pore through which he can kind of feed a length of DNA or whatever and get an impression of what that is as a direct experience. Yep. But it wouldn't necessarily make sense to have all of the perceptual equipment to see all of the smaller stuff than that, right? If in order to be able to do the genetic engineering, you'd probably want to be able to do this to to DNA, but you may not even need necessarily to be able to perceive like protein structure directly or any of the that would be useful potentially if you were doing like engineering, but like at the basic thing, you'd need something that lets you perceive genetic sequence. But so that kind of it seemed like a reasonable place to where you would find a barrier in your kind of the limit of your perception to me.
But it's interesting because if you think about it, obviously this is now some hardcore biology we're talking about now. For example, the difference between thymine and uracil is only a slight change, right? So it's basically, so there is a limit that Akin cannot reach, but like the limit is pretty, like the boundary is very thin, I would say.
I mean, it's determined in the same way that like the limit of like a polymerase, right? So one of these enzymes that is, for clarity, reading a piece of the DNA and seeing which base is complementary to it, right? So it has this ability to search for a base that will pair with the other one, and then you can infer what the state of infer what the base is that you're looking at, right? By what it pairs with. So that like there's a fixed set of things that enzyme will allow you to perceive, because it's those are the things that can go into it and fit right.
Yes.
As it were. So it like the ability of the like particularly shaped cavity in the enzyme to distinguish what goes in and out of it would be like the limit of what you can perceive in terms of differences of chemical structure.
I wonder how does the molecules that that Akin sends, what sort of what information does he receive? Like sort of like, does it stimulate his nerves? Do they like? I'm just trying to think of like, imagine the biochemical cycle that's involved in this.
Getting from the that low level stuff all the way back up to kind of like subjective conscious experience of something that's telling you about that low level information is where it gets a bit trickier to think about what would be going on.
Yeah, it just feels to me like,
I think we talked about it a little bit back at the beginning of the previous book when we were talking about the kind of genetic sense and this idea that there would be something like the sequencing technology where there's some kind of
there has to be some sort of input,
either like
output, like sort of like a release of energy in some form of ATP or like pyrosequencing when you have release of hydrogen ions or something. Yeah, I was just trying to imagine like
you need like something like a voltage change across a membrane or an output that you can detect in terms of chemical stuff that can then be detected by a receptor and amplified to produce a neuronal impulse. Yes. Right? It's the same kind of stuff that, I mean, very similar to the sort of thing that we do in existing sequencing technologies, either with nanopore or with polymerase based stuff, where you're either detecting like a change in tension across a membrane in the nanopore sequencing. So you have a piece of DNA going through a hole, and the voltage like across the membrane changes depending on what's in the gap. So you can kind of infer what the bases are on the section that's currently transversing the membrane. But and then the alternative is like sequencing by elongating the DNA. So you're doing what the cells do. You take a polymerase and you add bases, and then you can get some kind of a readout. Normally we do it with fluorescence, but that wouldn't really make sense in the biological context. So you could do it with electrical impulses. And so when a particular base is added, it produces a little spike in the electrical current, but you'd have to control which base that was to infer which one it was. So you'd have a whole quite complicated biological organ that was responsible for doing sequencing.
That's the thing. And just in the same time, I was thinking about the fact that, in the single cell sequencing, when you analyze cells, a cluster of cells, let's say, there is such a variety within the cells that, like, how do you make even sense out of it, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's the having two cells, the same origin, will have different stage of their like cell cycle or cell development or differentiation or whatever. So him probing into those cells is like a completely different universe. It's like looking in astronomy, looking all those stars, trying to understand what's on that one star, and then you try to probe more, and then you look into another star and you see completely something different, like a planet, whatever. It's just,
I mean, I suppose it does depend on whether or not he can perceive stuff that's not just the genetics of the cell, right? Because if he's just kind of being able to read out the genome, then he'd get the same information from all the cells that he's looking at. But if he can get additional stuff about what's being expressed and what the proteins are and so on, then it starts to be a whole universe of cells, as you say.
So that's the thing. Like, I'd be curious on what exactly he's feeling. This is the thing. Like, it's difficult to imagine and to translate it to our perspective.
I kind of have this like mental image of just like a guy in a lab coat with like his tongue stuck out, like with like an abnormally elongated, like pointy tongue, just like licking a petri dish. Like okay, I can see there's this. Like, imagine being able to like do that and then like perceive the fact that this is E. coli or whatever just sat on this plate. It's just, you get like a really detailed mental image of what's going on in the organism that you're looking at.
It's really
be super cool.
It'd be super cool, but really weird to see, like, just somebody like licking it. And also imagine you have all that information, you do like normal sequencing, right? And you look at it and you're something, no, this is wrong. This is not what I tasted. And it's just like people just sitting around you, just thinking, what the hell is he talking about? It's like, what do you mean by tasted it? It's just like, Yeah, but let's go back, I guess, because this is that boundary that we were talking about, just the atom boundary. It frustrated Akin in the book, as his book says, and we're told in the book. So he shifted his attention to what he could perceive. And he found that Lilith's flesh was so much more exciting and interesting, much more than those of Oankali. There was something wrong with hers, frightening and seductive. It told him that Lilith was essential but dangerous. On the other hand, Nikanj was interesting but not dangerous. While Ajas and Dichan were so similar, it was difficult sometimes to tell them apart, because they were sister and brother at the end of the day, right? And as he was studying her, Nikanj warned Lilith about it, that he's doing it, but she was aware of it. She could probably feel it. She wished that he would nurse like a normal baby, but Akin loved, but it was what it was. And Akin loved to listen to those people talking. So when he was nursed, so it allowed him to learn faster and learn more at the same time.
I can certainly see, like, from Lilith's perspective, this is going to be a bit strange.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
like,
so you got this.
It's just, you have this baby, initially, like, sucking on your on your boobs to get the milk, and then you suddenly feel something penetrating your flesh. Things like, oh, okay, he's doing this thing again. It's just like, yeah.
Yeah, I've just got this kind of mental image of like this kind of abstracted expression, just like, thinking about something and just, contemplatively examining the contents of his thoughts while he probes this. It's just like,
it's just,
it's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, it just feels so strange. But he had learned, as the book says, he had learned more words than he had yet had occasion to use. He collected words and gradually assembled them into questions. When his questions were answered, he remembered everything he was told. His picture of the world grew. And this suggests like how his memory was basically like what the Oankali made Lilith, like the eidetic memory. He can remember everything and learn out of it, which is amazing, and I'm jealous of it. So that's that. The conversation with Lilith continued then, as Lilith was glad that at least he's not stronger or faster in physical development than other children, except for having all his teeth already. And that's what I mentioned earlier, that he had already his teeth. And Nikanj, though, argued back that there were some children before in the past between humans that were born with teeth. It did happen, it does happen. Physically, though, he will look human until his metamorphosis. After that, he will have to find a way to avoid conflict. And Lilith thought that human will resent him because he won't be fully human. They will hate him for looking much younger than he sounds, which I think it's pretty valid point. The fact that he can already make sentences with being a few months old is just already ridiculous in itself.
Yeah, that would be a pretty. I'm just trying to picture that again. The like having a full-fledged conversation with like a swaddled infant.
It's like imagine it's like, oh, hello, the greetings. It's just like, oh wow, okay. It just reminds me of the Mask movie when the second one, when the baby of the Mask is born, and then like he's like, say daddy, mommy. Say daddy, mother. Daddy, mutter. It's just like
oh dear.
Yeah, it just would be so like I can imagine that for a lot of adult people would feel endangered in the way that their intelligence is being challenged.
Well, I mean, you get that with just
normal kids, just like ask
normal kind of kids who have a certain aptitude for stuff.
Asking you questions like you don't know, but you feel like you're being beaten by a kid because they have knowledge. Yeah, no, it's understandable, but it'd probably be even more enhanced considering it's like just a newborn baby. And the thing is, this is where it is interesting, because not only that they would hate him for that he sounds younger than he is, like he sounds older than he is, but they will hate him because older humans were not allowed to have sons. And Nikanj tells her that they will allow humans to have sons now. They feel more confident about mixing them. And this is where the book says, before now, too many Ooloi could not perceive the necessary mixture. They could have made mistakes, and their mistakes could be monsters. And this is where it's interesting. It was hard. I mean, I think later on it talks about a bit more about this fact, but that it's the human males could be danger to the Oankali. But in danger in what sense? Like the male aggressiveness with the Oankali abilities, like being stronger, faster, and more intelligent?
I would assume that that's the sort of thing they're talking about, right? Yeah, it's the kind of the same sort of disposition that led to some fairly messy situations in the previous book, coupled with the like the deadly stingers and so on, has the potential to be a bit of a threat,
especially if they would be stronger and faster, have regenerative powers like Lilith. And then they quickly, as well as the intelligence and the eidetic memory, you basically have a superhuman in front of you that's much more cunning and can respond faster to you. And the first thing that people respect is power, and then comes the intelligence, and you basically have that in one human being. So yeah, I can see sort of why would they, and then Lilith says that that some humans still think that those babies are monsters, and when asked by Nikanj, do you still? Lilith doesn't really respond. And it's interesting because her answer, like lack of answer with what we just asked, what the conclusion we came with, that she had daughters beforehand, and now she has a son that looks like human, and assuming that maybe they don't look like human, that she is still unsure herself. And Nikanj continues then saying that that she should be content because there was a group of Oankali that saying that there should never be a human-born male ever again. We could construct female children from human females and male children of Oankali females. We've done that until now. And Lilith says that, and cheated everyone. I just want daughters, I want sons. Other people feel the same.
It's interesting because it does feel as though a little bit like the experience the Oankali had with the human males on the ship is colouring their perception of males just a little bit.
Yes, there is a bit of prejudice against the males, human males. Understandable what Lilith also underwent, during the training and awakening those the other people. But the thing is, it's interesting because it's like, but the thing is, like, I just wanted daughters, right? It's suggested like the Oankali couldn't have daughters; they had to have sons, right? So there's a control not only of the humans but also the Oankali.
I assume that they're trying to maintain a sort of gender balance among the children, and that if the human parents can only have, if the human parents can only have female children, then the Oankali parents would have to have male children to balance out the numbers.
I guess so, but at the same time, it just sort of doesn't make sense. I mean, like, actually, maybe. But then later on in the book, it says a bit something different about this whole situation. We'll get to that, I guess. So the book says this, I know, and we control children in ways we should not to, make them mature as Oankali-born males and human-born females. We control inclinations that should be left to individual children. Even the group that suggests that we go on this way knows we shouldn't. But they were afraid. A male who's human enough to be born of human female could be a danger to us all. We must try though. We'll learn from Akin. And yeah, they were scared. They were scared of what the humans could do.
Concerned about an overly human male child. Interesting.
And this is
go
on.
And I think it's I think it might be a reflection of kind of the differences in the typical manifestation of male and female aggression, right? As male aggression tends to be physical.
Yes.
Whereas female aggression tends to be more expressed socially.
Yes, you mentioned that before. It's one of the other.
Yeah. And so I think they feel more equipped to handle the
societal,
the social aggression than they do the physical, because I mean they can be a fairly serious physical threat with Oankali abilities, right? It's and of course you have if it's a physical threat, you might actually kind of directly end up killing people, but
that's what's
less so with a. But
that's what's interesting, right? Because Akin can taste pain, right? That they feel the pain of the other being, right? You realizing that what causes pain, right? It's usually what is enough for most people to realize that we don't want to hurt another being, right? And in the same time, like, it also suggests that why not just teach the human children from the very beginning, like the living together with Oankali, that it's an absolutely normal thing. Right, the sort of, I think it's the word that Lilith uses later, indoctrination. Right, that if that's the situation.
So we do get to that, right?
So why would it be a problem? Yeah, so maybe let's get to it and we can continue with the.
So I think that's what Lilith wants, isn't it? She says that why not bring up the children with the Oankali, but they can't do that when it comes to children who are. Born of the humans who are kind of not like under the Oankali's influence, right? If they've got kind of like free living groups of individuals, they don't have a high level of social control that they can use to sort of inculcate specific ideas in the kids, right? They want it to be biological, not ideological.
That's the thing. This is what's surprising, because like Nikan says that it would be working blindly and they couldn't have trade. Like, what do you mean by that? Like, just because it takes a bit longer time to develop this, and like, people have done this. Like, cultures have on the earth have done this before. There are countries that would invade other countries and assimilate them. That's what happened, right?
But this is, I think, this is where the concept of Oankali trade is super interesting to me, because I think it has that implied within it is this kind of unity of biology and culture. Right, they don't want the two to be independent of one another and separable. Yes. Right, they having a functioning society that is contingent only upon a particular cultural paradigm is not enough for them. Right, it has to be there has to be a biological component that holds them in that kind of pattern of behavior. Because if there isn't, then they can't do the biological trade to have that characteristic. That's
no. I think
they'd have to do it only culturally.
I agree with you. I think in this case it is particularly talking about this fact that it is the genetic, right? The trait is genetic, and that's why in this case it wouldn't be a trait. But Nikanj also then says that if they wanted to do this, they would have to take the children away from humans from the moment they were born, and that would basically mean that humans would be just kept like non-sentient animals just for breeding. And it's it puts in perspective that, like, in a way they don't want to do it, and this just makes Lilith sigh. It's just like, she's just like, she sometimes says the most awful things with the soft voice, and it's like, your soft voice. And she then asks if Akin will survive around the human males because they will hate him. They will see him as a threat, understandably. Like, I mean, he's more intelligent than them, or perceive the information. But Nikanj tells her that they won't hate him as he takes Akin from her, who gasped as Nikanj contacted with him through his tentacles. By the time Akin is old enough, Nikanj told that his body reveals who he is. He'll be an adult and he'll be able to hold his own. Fight, but only to save his life. He'll be like Oankali-born male, a solitary wanderer. He won't settle on the farm, and families will change. A complete construct family will be female and Uloi and children. Males will come and go as they wish, and they will find welcome, which is much different, right? I mean, a certain point of human families, right? Because nowadays, like it's said that more and more males are involved in the upbringing of children. As I say, millennials are more involved than in families than their boomer parents, right? Because in all the times, the father would go to work and bring money, and while the mother would stay at home. While nowadays it's because of the economical situation that both parents have to work and both have to take care of the family, children, then just shows that there's involvement. And here it says that, that there's going to be different, right? That the males will actually be more like Oankalis, solitary wanderers. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's a bit like the like elephant family structure, where you have like a matriarch and wandering males and kind of a family of younger elephants, and there's a bunch of kind of analogous collections of reproductive strategy. But humans in particular, we have very complex, convoluted reproductive strategies. There's a whole bunch of for example, like the male reproductive strategy, and there's a complementary male-female reproductive strategy that's kind of affected by the asymmetry and how rapidly we can reproduce. So, the limiting factor for how many kids you can have is the woman, not the man. So there's kind of that slight inherent asymmetry means that the man has the males have a slight inclination to pursue both the long-term reproductive strategy and the short-term one. But there's similarly because there's status differences, there are also reasons why the females will pursue a short-term reproductive strategy, but depending on the quality of the male that they're interested in. So you've got this really complex dynamic where the males sort of try and pursue generally speaking, there's a pretty good incentive for pursuing the kind of stable pair mate bonded strategy where you invest a lot in a small number of children. But because it's easy for males to make a kind of a small contribution and then leave, if you are a higher status male with lots of resources, there's a stronger kind of inclination to have multiple partners and have multiple children with them, because you can kind of spread your bets across a larger number of kids. But similarly, if you're a lower status female, there's a reasonable incentive to pair up with a higher status male, because you can potentially get better resources and outlook for your kids by being a secondary partner to a higher status individual. So there's this whole really complicated dynamics with respect to social status and the amount of investment that you can put into individual children that determines this kind of and people the balance that people have between those two reproductive strategies. It's a super interesting set of complexities in human reproductive strategies that people have looked at through the kind of evolutionary perspective. So now in this context, right, we've thrown this wrench in of a totally different family structure where the reproductive rate is controlled by the Uloi, and they also control kind of what the level of genetic contribution is to the offspring. And it really completely complicates and utterly changes the dynamics and the game theory. It's a real difficult thing to get your head around if you want to go through the evolutionary game theory for what the
I guess it's not only pursuing the female, but also you have to the Uloi has to also find you attractive in a way, right? It has to be compatible. You have to be compatible with now two partners, not just one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's another complexity.
It's interesting. It's interesting topic, and it provides really quite a substantial difference in what we know of and what will happen in future for all the Oankali males or human Oankali male hybrids.
Yeah. I think it's not kind of immediately obvious to me that the kind of wandering between groups strategy is the one that would necessarily fall out of this, or the one that I think you could make that strategy come out of it depending on how the Ooloi arranged things. I think for the amount of genetic contribution and how many children and so on, and like the need or lack thereof to contribute resources to the upbringing of the kids. You could produce that dynamic if you wanted to, but it seems like you could also produce quite different ones if you wanted to structure it differently. So it seems to me almost like this is a conscious choice for the model that they want to have for the behavior and the incentive structure for the human males. It
just feels to me also that the fact that it's sort of like in some species of animals and on Earth that like mating with several males and then like ducks, for example, I think storing sperm and then picking up maybe in the case of like also picking the best potential genetic changes markup from different males by the Ooloi.
True.
To sort of combine and produce even better quality offsprings. I don't know. It feels to me like the whole system has changed, and in a way that and obviously the result is obviously to have the best offspring. But now you also have the fact that there's an Ooloi that can modify and pick and match like candies basically from a shop. Like I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. I don't want that from this, so I'll pick the other from something else, right?
Yeah. I suppose the implication is that the Ooloi, for them, it makes sense to pursue a promiscuous sexual strategy because they can pick and choose from the genetic material they collect what they're going to use. So, like there are certain birds that have a somewhat similar strategy. Yeah. There's this kind of the sperm competition where the most effective sperm ends up getting through to the eggs, so it makes sense to mate with a larger number of males, and they kind of hedge across like the higher status males.
It's interesting. I think this is going to be a really different aspect. Like I just sort of imagine it sort of shows the changes on also of the society, right? Because if that was like, imagine the world as if we had this sort of perspective, right? You have the Ooloi now. There wouldn't be matriarchy or patriarchy. There will be Ooliarchy?
Yeah. Ooliarchy, whatever that is.
Basically another version, like basically they are the leading sort of, they modify. If we had normal world in this if we had the world in this perspective, then there would be, for example, like in GATTACA episode with Xenogenesis, where basically, if you're an Ooloi, you're better because you can modify, and you're the leading because you're gonna lead the family and take care of the family, while the males and females are like, you pick them as like, oh, I like your, like stuff like that, right? So it'd be a massive shift of society as well, and it should suggest that this shift in society might happen even in the Oankali perspective, because I mean, Ooloi already are sort of in charge of everything, but at the same time, it's like they said in the previous book, it's a collective, right? It's not just Ooloi making decisions. All the females and males also are involved in this. But now here we have sort of more a mix of both worlds. So there will be a sort of shift.
Yeah. So in terms of the kind of like the reproductive power for the species rests very much in the hands of the Ooloi, right? Because they can they control what the gene mixing is and the to a significant degree the kind of rate of reproduction. So I suppose they need, to some degree, they would need the consent of the partners to gestate and to provide the genetic material. So there's a certain balancing factor there, but it seems like a lot of power rests with the Ooloi in this
I just
system.
imagine Ooloi in the human world, that basically there are some people Ooloi that provide service for those males and females that just don't want have another Ooloi in their lives, just want to have paired them, and just always like, I can mix the
I mean, actually, come to think of it, relating this whole thing to the GATTACA episode, like we're kind of creating technological Ooloi.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
We're putting the power to control our genetics and reproductive stuff in the hands of a technical capability.
Absolutely. And to those who are we're talking about episode 25, the special episode, I would highly recommend listening to it and watching it, because It's amazing, but it's pretty long, but it's amazing. So go watch it, listen to it. Yes.
Yeah, there's no video.
I mean, because I say watch it because YouTube is the one.
Watch the movie.
Watch our website. Listen to the podcast. But let's finish off the chapter.
Yeah, this has got me wanting to do like an evolutionary dynamic simulation of what would go on with all
yes,
this,
like develop. I guess you could provide,
strategies.
Do a machine learning and like provide certain settings to like how would the society look like.
Yeah,
simulation of what would happen. It'd be interesting to see the results. But going back to the chapter, this is where it ends, saying Lilith then says, they will, after Nikanj talks about the wandering males, Lilith says that they'll have no homes, but it's sad that they'll have no homes. But Nikanj tells her that it would be a prison to them. They'll have what they want and need, but what about the ability to father their kids, right? Lilith asks, and to which Nikanj tells her that they might choose to keep contact with the children, but they won't live with them permanently. The trade is a change, not only physical. And he ends with the question, do you think your children would only look different? That's where the chapter 2 ends. I mean, we knew.
Yeah,
we knew that trade is not just genetical. It's going to be more of the societal and behavioral change. But like, it really hits a nail on this whole situation, right? People don't realize how much different it's going to be.
But this strikes me as another possible strategic error from the Oankali, though, because it's creating the structure with a bunch of unattached males like that rarely goes well. I mean, it's unattached males, but presumably sexually satisfied ones. But it kind of depends on, and it's a bit tricky. But
I mean,
having a bunch of them around is probably not good from a possible violence perspective.
Yeah, and also for the fact is that some people, I mean, depends on how the human-Oankali hybrid develop, but if they still have this sort of, but Oankali say they want to like remove that sort of territorial attitude from humans, right? That some humans, males, would prefer to only have one, stay with their families, instead of like some males would prefer, to just jump from the flower to the flower, as they say.
Yeah, but I said that having strong attachments like tempers aggression, and having higher levels of investment in particular offspring, like it produces, you have something to lose, right? You have an investment which is you then have to protect, right? So it makes you much more risk averse, which means you're much less likely to engage in violent conflict type activities, which are highly risky. In order to if you don't have that attachment, then the riskiness of the behavior that you can engage in goes up because you don't have as much to lose. So it's interesting, and I think and this is actually brings me back. I wanted to say about the previous prediction I had said, long-term prediction. I think this will be one of the reasons why there's going to be a conflict between the human males and the human-Oankali hybrids, because one thing will be obviously the alienness. There's like, these are like bastard children, blah blah blah. That's gonna be the first issue, and two, there's gonna the change of that sort of like, the females, for example, let's say human female and the human Oankali hybrids, and for example, females not feeling like that sort of jumping between female to female will cause issues for the human males, and there's gonna be conflict additional to what I predicted with the because of the hybrid's existence in general. Okay. Anything a little bit more specific on that front? Because there will be conflict.
No, it's in terms of like, I feel like, the fact that, as if I could quote one of the most famous songs that out there, Cotton Eye Joe. Just the fact that there was a man who just came in and then like, seduced the women, right, in the society, and then just disappeared, right? That sort of, it puts me in this sort of perspective that there's, even though the reproduction is being limited to, obviously, by the Ooloi, right? But the fact is that there could be societies of human males and human females, but there's an Ooloi, and there's gonna be a combination of and of course the other Oankali. And for example, if there's a human-Oankali hybrid male that comes in and just like, has sex and then just disappears, and then it's like, and steals, let's say, up in inverted commas, steals all the females, right? That there's gonna be gonna be a internal issue, as you mentioned earlier, about this whole situation that would add to the overall discontent, if you know what I mean.
Yep. Yeah. So overall, a very interesting start. Lots of seeds for conflict. Lots of open questions.
There's a lot of things happening. We were given a lot of information, a lot of things happening, and it is interesting that where it goes next. For me, just chapter 3 prediction wise is that we're gonna get more about Akin, developing what his perspective. He's gonna learn more, probably more of the genetic history of the the Oankali, like what things are. But that's sort of like, and obviously we'll learn more from his perspective of how it looks like. But
yeah, so one of the things that was interesting to me was that we don't get a strong sense of the genetic memory, right? The long-term genetic memory of the ancestral Oankali populations in Akin, right? It's not something that he's kind of explored in himself yet, or so it's. I wonder if there's a degree to which they might be, or to which they can control that. I wonder how much of the genetic memory that they have control over when they're reproducing. Perhaps they can endow you with more or less memory from the history of the species, and they may choose to give you more or less of it. I just bring up that because when we have this established thing in this universe of there is genetic memory that goes back potentially billions of years, and we don't have that direct experience from Akin of that. Just
no, yet. Absolutely, I agree. It's interesting. I think so far the second book is already more interesting than the first one. It's amazing. I want to read more. I want to learn more about this. What's going to happen next? Looking through Akin's eyes to his perception of things. I think the next few chapters is gonna be like this: his development, how things are, his perceiving, maybe learning more about the boundary he reached, and maybe Nikanj will explain to him more detail what it is. But I think that's where the chapters are leading to.
Okay. Well, looking forward to getting into more of this.
Me too. And I guess on that note, thank you very much everyone for listening. We can find all the places we upload our podcast on our website, xenogenesis.com. I was Michael Glinka.
I was Richard Acton.
Bye.
Goodbye.